Okay, Ernie, here's the question.
Why is it that when Moshe made the menorah, he had a hard time understanding how to make it, and Hashem says, "Put it in the fire." Puts it in the fire, and it comes out a menorah. Why is that not the case with the covering of the Aron with the Kruvim as well? The gold piece, it's made out of one piece of gold as well. Why wasn't that the case with that as well?
Okay. The question is, I think another question has to be asked. Hashem says to Moshe, you will make the Mishkan based on the structure which you saw on the mountain. Meaning, Moshe had a blueprint for everything in the Mishkan, including the menorah. So as we see, printed in the Chumash, exactly the way the menorah looked. The physical visual, that wasn't the complication of the menorah. So we're not talking about the craftsmanship of the menorah or the craftsmanship of the Aron and how intricate it was. How do you take that slab of gold and develop from that slab these two cherubs, which are not attached, but rather they develop from the gold itself? That's what we're talking about. We find based on the pasuk, it says, why was Bezalel the most qualified to oversee the building in the Mishkan? Because he was endowed with a special divine spirit, a divine understanding. And the Gemara in Brachos tells us what was the divine understanding which he had, which no one else had. He knew how to conjugate the letters of the Aleph base through which creation came about. Meaning, and we discussed this in the past, that every aspect of the Mishkan corresponds to an act of creation. Meaning the energies which were released to bring about existence, the terrestrial, the celestial, all aspects of existence, including the spiritual worlds, that was activated by the conjugation of these letters and lied within the letters of the Aleph base. Bezalel understood that, and therefore what had to be infused in every component of the Mishkan was a similar intent, and there was always a corresponding factor. That's the understanding. So we're not talking about just the physical item, the physical component, how to structure it, what its dimension was, what the specifications were. In addition, how to be infused with the special kavanah, which what that represented, to activate every aspect of existence, and that God should will that part of existence due to what happens in the Mishkan. So the Mishkan was a microcosm. Now, the Aron itself was the repository for the what? For the luchos, the luchos shvuros, the shivei luchos, the broken tablets, and the Sefer Torah. That's what it was. The 5 chumashim are very concise. It is what it is. Torah Sheba'al Peh is unending. The depth and the breadth of Torah is infinite. The menorah itself activates the siyata d'shmaya, all the forces that give a person a level of understanding which is impossible to have unless those forces are activated. So the menorah itself is connected to the infinite. So even Moshe Rabbeinu, even though he was shokol connected to Yisrael, he was equivalent of the whole Jewish people, but in terms of what had to be infused in the menorah, Moshe was not able to do, because it was beyond his capacity. The only one who was able to infuse that understanding in the menorah to bring about the result which is needed is only God himself. Therefore, all Moshe could do, as we discussed yesterday, you have to take initiative. Yogata Motzoso. As when we study Torah, to become upon the truths and the understanding of the Torah, that's what we call siyata d'shmaya. The Gemara says that's all divine assistance, gives us the various levels of understanding. And that's based on the degree that you apply yourself and you toil and you sacrifice for the Torah. But the levels that you're able to come upon are unlimited levels. The only one who was able to infuse the menorah with that ability or that reality to activate those forces is only Hashem himself. So the question is, why did Moshe initially, he says he had difficulty, and Hashem says, no problem, take the menorah, the gold, just put the block of gold into the kiln, it'll come out of the, he should have understood immediately. It's beyond his capacity. We read in the Medrash that Moshe Rabbeinu, when he was in Shamayim, every day for over a 40-day period, Hashem would teach him the Torah in its entirety, and at the end of the day, he would forget everything that Hashem had taught him. And this exercise repeated itself for 40 days. Every day, the Torah in its entirety, and finally, on the 40th day, he was able to retain everything that Hashem had taught him. So the question is, to be able to taught the Torah in its entirety in one day, it's miraculous. It's beyond any human being's capacity. But if God wills something, he wills that the Torah, regardless of its breadth and depth, whatever Moshe is meant to know and understand, was given to him within one day. So what he did on the 40th day, that he retained it, why did he retain it on the first day? Why did this exercise have to repeat itself for 40 days? And only finally on the 40th day, only then he was able to retain it. What Hashem was communicating to Moshe, that regardless of your dimension of spirituality, regardless of your level of intellectualism and genius, the Torah itself is only representations of things which represent the infinite in the spiritual realm. As a result of that, the only way the human being who's finite on the most limited level compared to what the spiritual is, the only way he's able to retain it and understand it is only through siyata d'shmaya, only through divine assistance. Even the understanding and the retention of that. As a result of that, this was communicated to Moshe through this exercise, 40 days, teaches him everything. So that's a question being taught in a limited amount of time. And now, what about the retention of the information? To retain it, seemingly, if you understood it as it was being taught to you, at the end of the day, it was as if it was not, he forgot everything. That, again, is to communicate this reality of what Torah is, that Torah, in every aspect of it, is siyata d'shmaya. And therefore, only after 40 days, because 40 always represents, from conception to life, is always a 40-day process. When the child is conceived, when does life become life? 40 days. We were 40 years in the Midbar. Moshe was in heaven 40 days and 40 nights. Only then did he bring down the first set of luchos rishonos. That's the understanding. So we're not talking about the physical makeup and the profile of the menorah. That the Aron contained the Torah Shebechsav. That's not a level of understanding. That's a repository. That didn't generate the siyata d'shmaya. The illumination of the menorah represents Torah Sheba'al Peh. So what that had to activate forces to give us relevance to something that's beyond the finite. Therefore, the only one who's able to inculcate and infuse that menorah with that intent to be effective in that context was only Hashem himself. Jay's asking a question, why do you have to teach him the whole Torah's entirety on the first day and every day repeat the same totality? Every day you should have taught 1/40th. On the 40th day, you teach everything. Teach the last 40th, and he has the totality of the Torah. Firstly, just simple understanding. The whole concept is Moshe Rabbeinu forgot. That means what he was taught, he was not able to retain. If he would have been taught a 40th, then he retained that 40th. Every day he added another percentage. So good. Like that's we accumulate knowledge. But the lesson that had to be communicated to Moshe Rabbeinu was that even if you understand everything, to retain it, it's beyond human capacity. Because the information represents something which goes beyond the finite. See, if the process were in your process, how do you communicate that reality of what Torah is? It doesn't communicate that fact. That's firstly. And that's the answer. But I'm just saying, it's good to know the Trumas Hadeshin, which was the first of the later commentators. His Rebbe was the Ran, Rabbeinu Nissim. Rabbeinu Nissim was the last of the era of the Rishonim, of the early commentators. And he writes about his Rebbe, that the difference between his Rebbe, Rabbeinu Nissim, the Ran, and all the early commentators, such as the Rashba, Rabbeinu Shlom ben Aderes, the Ramban, Rabbeinu Moshe bar Nachman, the Rambam, the Rimigash, Rabbeinu Yitzchak Alfasi. These were the early commentators and decisors and codifiers. He said that the earlier commentators and codifiers, if you'd ask them any halacha question in the six sections of Shas, anything, they'd be able to answer you immediately without hesitation. Regardless of the intricacy of that question and the profoundness of the question, they were able to answer you immediately, and then they would show you how they sourced it and what it's based upon. His Rebbe, the Ran, was only able to do it in 2 Sidorim, only in 2 sections of the Shas. All 6 he wasn't able to. But the earlier, anywhere in the 6 sections, instantaneous, on the moment, they're able to give you that answer. Okay? Meaning, just to bring you out a point, even in recent times, when they processed anything in Shas, it was everything simultaneous. You following? Everything was, meaning when I learn Ribis, every other subject matter in Shas, it has to be consistent with what I'm studying now, and this has to be consistent with everything else. Because there's a certain symmetry and balance in the knowledge that this itself has to conform and coincide with everything else that exists within Torah. When we study this, I have an answer. But who says maybe my answer is not correct, because there may be an understanding elsewhere, based on this understanding, a Gemara elsewhere, or some other subject elsewhere, would be contradictory to what I'm saying. That's the reason why we say, let's say, Reb Kiva Eger. The Chofetz Chaim writes on the Reb Kiva Eger that Reb Kiva Eger was the father of the Chassam Sofer, just historical fact. And the Chofetz Chaim writes that the Vilna Gaon was a person he could not even relate to his greatness. So for him to even consider disagreeing with the Vilna Gaon, it was beyond his capacity. Because if you understood what understood, you wouldn't ask a question. And that's why we can't disagree with Rishonim, with early commentators. He says Rabbi Kiva Eger, as great as he was one of a kind in the era of Achronim, but he was able to fathom his dimension of greatness. But he could not fathom the greatness of the Vilna Gaon. When Rabbi Kiva Eger asked the question, so you have an answer to his question, but could be you had the answer, Rabbi Kiva Eger didn't have the answer. Why did Rabbi Kiva Eger have the answer? You don't think Rabbi Kiva Eger was as smart as you were? Don't you think he was adept in Shas and his knowledge of Torah as much as you are? But you come up, I have a deeper understanding. Nobody will ever say that. We don't, but nevertheless, we have to understand at our level that we understand. Unless you have a proof or indication that's incorrect, we have a right to go with it. But Rabbi Kiva Eger, when he studied Shas, it was all simultaneous. The reason why he didn't give your answers maybe because the way he studied something elsewhere, it would be contradictory to that. Therefore, he couldn't give your answer. But you're not aware of how Rabbi Kiva Eger studied the entirety of Shas. So when you study something in its entirety and you see the full picture simultaneously, you're able to see how all the pieces fit. But if you only see just the tip of the iceberg and you believe that's the totality of the iceberg, it seems to be okay. It seems to be correct, but you don't know what's under the surface, and it may not be consistent with what's under the surface. That's the difference in greatness and a person who has great level of limitation. We mentioned yesterday about Turim here. It says the oil was kosis lamaor. It was crushed. It was pressed for illumination. So the Baal says the word kosis is chof tov, which is 420, yud tov, which is 410. Meaning, for how many years did they kindle the menorah in the base of Migdosh? In the Migdosh, second base of Migdosh was 420 years. The first base of Migdosh was 410 years. That's the Baal term here on location. At the beginning of Truma, it says V'osili Migdosh v'shochanti. I mentioned this yesterday. V'shochanti, shochain, I will dwell. Tov Yud. The Gemara tells us in Yuma that there was a difference between Bayis Rishon and Bayis Sheni. There were 5 things lacking in Bayis Sheni which existed in Bayis Rishon. One of them was the Aron. The Aron was not in Bayis Sheni. It was hidden away right before the destruction of the first base of Mikdash. It was hidden away. There were a number of things weren't there. But one of the essentials that wasn't there, the Shechina was not there on an ongoing basis. The Bayis Rishon, it was there on an ongoing basis. Bayis Sheni was not there. So therefore, it's Shochanti. The Shochain, the level of God's presence at that level was only Tov Yud, only 410 years. Shochanti. Bayis Sheni was not there. So he says, we say every morning in the Volotzion, V'ato Kodosh Yeshev Tilos Yisrael. You are holy, Yoshev Tilos Yisrael. You shave and you dwell with the praiseworthy of the Jewish people. The miracle value of Kadosh is 410. Ato Kadosh, when you were at that level of Kedusha, Yoshev Tilos Yisrael, that was only 410 years. That was Bayis Rishon. That's the Baal Turim last week's parsha. The Shachanti Vato Kadosh. Kadosh, numerically, is 410. That's the Baal Turim. These things are literally gems, they're diamonds. Every one of these indications, what he uncovers for us. It says, what is Olam Haba? What goes on there? And the Rambam in Hilchos Yisod Torah speaks about this. The Gemara says, Tzadikim Yoshvim, the Tzadikim, they sit there, even though when we speak sitting, there's no sitting, there's no standing. It's a spiritual dimension to the world to come. Vitrosem b'rashem, and they're wearing their crowns. V'nenin mishsid hashchina, and they're benefiting from the radiance of the Shechina. That's what the Gemara says. Tzadikim yoshvim vitrosem b'rashem, and they have their crowns on their heads, and v'nenin mishid hashchina, and they're benefiting from the ziv, from the radiance of the Shechina. So the Rambam explains, do you think when Moshe Rabbeinu was exposed to God, do you think the ordinary person, or even another great tzaddik, benefits and has an understanding of the Shechina is the same degree as Moshe Rabbeinu? So the Rambam explains what it says, Trusena Rishem means, based on the dimension of crown you wear, that only indicates your capacity to what you could appreciate and have relevance to that Shechina. Everybody's exposed to the Shechina if you make it to the world to come. But based on your spiritualization, what you achieved in this world, and you impacted your neshama, that will be your capacity to which you're able to appreciate the Shechina. So everybody experiences the Shechina at a different level. It's based on what kind of crown you're wearing. The crown only indicates the spiritual dimension of the neshama, of the soul. I always give an example. And the Rambam explains it. A person has a cataract. A person has no cataract, and the eye is healthy. You see clearly. The person has a slight cataract. He doesn't have the clarity of the first person. And what about it's a thicker membrane covering? The light comes through, but the image is not that clear. So based on your level of spirituality, what you accomplished this world, to what degree the neshama was developed, that's the spiritual capacity. To that capacity, in that context, that's how you experience the Shechina and understand the Shechina. same thing. 10, study Torah, you activate forces, which brings it down with a greater level of intensity. 5, to a lesser degree. 3, lesser, 2, 1. So each one, it brings Shechina, but each one's at a lesser level to be impacted and affected because of the number of people who are studying Torah.
And the Mishkan, the level of the
I wasn't here to learn Parsha with you. Truma, it says there were 3 metals that were needed. Zov, Kesef, and Nechoshes. Right? Gold, silver, and copper. So the Medrash says, Zov, what does Zov represent? Ze Mishkano shel Moshe, Shohoya Ov, Eitzel HaKadosh Baruch Hu Zov. Gold is the most precious of the 3 metals mentioned. Gold was beloved to Hashem. The first Mishkan, the Mishkan was beloved to Hashem because it was Mishkano shel Moshe. It had that special level. Kesef is a Bayis Rishon. Kesef is more precious than copper, less precious than gold. That's the first base of Mikdash. That everything was there. As I said, nothing was lacking. The second base of Mikdash is Nechoshes. That's compared to copper. In Aramaic, the word Nechushta means it's like at the bottom. It's deficient. So the Shechina, as I said, the Mishkan of Moshe was of La Kodesh Baruch Hu Kizov. It was beloved to God. It was the most precious because Moshe built that himself. I mean, he oversaw that, the building of the Mishkan. Although Betzalel was the one who actually was hands-on, but Moshe oversaw everything in its totality. The first Mishkan, base of Migdash, was Kesef. Kesef is not Zov. And copper is not silver. That's the understanding, just to bring out this point. What the Mishkan was and what the base of Migdash was. So in terms of Ov, it was more beloved. But in terms of permanence, the base of Migdash was the permanent location, and the Mishkan was in transition. They should take for you. The oil should be taken from you, for you. What do you mean for you? What's the Elecho? Meaning it's under that's your domain. As we said, what's Torah? What's the menorah? The oil, the illumination of the oil, that's Torah Shabbat Peh. This is Moshe's domain. The source of Torah is Moshe Rabbeinu, meaning he was the conduit through which Torah was communicated to us. I once mentioned the Zohar. Alan, you would remember this. Maybe some of the young people would also, which the Orach Chaim HaKadosh quotes that we were redeemed from Egypt. No, we were redeemed from Bavel in the schus of Avraham Avinu. We were redeemed from Horas and Modai, Persia, in the schus of Yitzchak. We were redeemed from the Greek exile in the schus of Yaakov. We will only be redeemed from Golus Edom only in the schus of Moshe Rabbeinu. So why is the Golus? This is the most lengthy Golus exile. It's over 2,000 years. Because Moshe Rabbeinu will not allow his schus to be used until the Jews meet a certain dimension of Torah study. What does it have to be? It has to be kosis lamor. It has to be zoch. It has to be pure, and it has to be done with what? With sacrifice. And since the Jews hadn't met that dimension of purity and sacrifice, therefore he will not allow his schus to be used. Only when we achieve that, then he will allow his schus to be used. So therefore it's Elecha. But why? What is Edom? Edom is Hayudai Yisov. When the Kol is Yaakov, the Yidayim are not Yidayim Esav. So you have to achieve that quality of Kol that it should no longer be the Yidayim Esav. Because otherwise it's what we call half-baked. It's not where it should be. You may think it is, but it's not. So therefore, the Kol Yaakov has to reach that special level of purity. And once that is, and then evil will be expunged, be destroyed altogether. And that's for Olo Moshe Mar Tzion, lishvodas hareisov. Therefore, Moshe Rabbeinu will not say it. It's equal elecha. The oil is for you because that's your domain, and you're the determinator when yes and when not. That's why it's elecha.